What's up YouTube, Dal here from Zephyr War Games, and today I'm going to bring you my third place local DDD profile, but rather than doing it as a standard deck profile and taking you through everything card by card, the list is relatively similar. I'm actually going to go in depth of what the cards do and how they kind of utilize your play. So what are your starters, what are your extenders, what are your fusion cards, how do you play around the Biru, so on and so forth. So please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. With all of that out of the way, I'm going to dive headfirst into one of the most hyped decks around right now, and that is DDDs. So let's start off with asking the question, why are DDD so hyped right now? Well, it is because of this brand new card, DD Griffin. Now, they did get other cards as well, and I will explain them as we go through them in the profile. But in my opinion, I feel that Griffin is the best one for the pure fact that it allows you to turbo out a second DD without needing to open up into a swirl or a necro or get those to the graveyard, and that lets you get into Gilgamesh, and that sets your scales and lets you continue plays from there. I will also say as well that this is EU legal, so we will not be playing Rage King. Hopefully, fingers crossed, these cards will get a rarity upgrade, and what I mean by that is Kepler, Copernicus, Thomas, Necro Slime, even DD Vice Typhoon, and definitely the Dark Contract Gate will get a foil reprint in Ghost from the Past 2, fingers crossed, and then hopefully we'll see Rage King in that one there. If you are playing in America, you do get to use Rage King as well, so for stuff like that, it's up to you if you want to cut Vice Typhoon, cut Orpheros down to 1, entirely up to you. So we'll start off with, of course, Griffin is a mandatory 3 of. In my opinion, it is one of the best cards. It is definitely the best new card, and it is one of the best cards for DDDs. So what does it do? Well, if you control a DD monster, and keep in mind the one thing that I will stress at the start of this video if you are new to DDs, is if one of your cards said, if you control a DD monster or you can revive a DD monster, it will allow you to bring back a triple D monster because it contains at least 2 Ds in the name. If the card effect says to bring back a triple D, you cannot bring back a double D or summon off of the back of a double D. That does come relevant when we get into the new XYZ of the Divisor King, which I think is absolutely incredible. So, Griffin is, if you control a DD monster, whether it be a double D or a triple D, you can special summon it for free. When it is pendulum summoned, you can discard a DD or a Dark Contract to draw a card. When it is revived from the graveyard, it adds you a DD card from your deck to the hand. So you can search out the brand new Trap of Headhunt, or of course you can search out Orpheros or anything else that you might need to continue your combos going. It also has a very nice scale effect that you can target a face-up fiend monster you control, give it 500 attack for every Dark Contract in the field or in the graveyard of a different name, and then destroy this card. Now that can be very, very helpful if you do open up something like your Oblivion King Ragnarok, because then you basically put this into your extra deck for free. So you summon this or you scale this with your Gilgamesh, pop it, activate the second scale that you might need, and go from there. Speaking of the scales, we play a total, in theory, of 8 lower levels. So you've got 1, 1 and 2 3s. And then we play a total of 5 higher levels, 10s with Keplers, a 5 with Ragnarok, and a 6 with Thomas. Now, it's very rare that you need to go scale higher than that. Keep in mind that if you do want to be pendulum summoning these 2 out, which you very rarely want to do, you will need to go for Kepler. In the modernized builds, the idea is to get to your 2 level 4s to make your rank 4 plays. Kepler, very straightforward. Now, the one other thing that we are missing that you can play if you want to is the Cerberus, which is another pendulum monster, and it basically lets you level modulate, which is really important because it can turn Kepler into a 4, which means the times you don't open up a second level 4 to pendulum summon out, you can just turn Kepler into a level 4 and make your rank 4 plays. But it is, in a European build, it is quite irrelevant until we get Rage King, because then Rage King and the Cerberus are the ones you're putting in the scales for the Gilgamesh. Kepler is when it is normal summoned or special summoned, you get to search a Dark Contract, and off the back of that, of course, that Dark Contract then turns out to search you into a Griffin. In America, you do have a 1-card combo off the back of the Kepler. Unfortunately, that does involve Rage, which we don't have, so that is something to keep in mind. It does have additional effects as well. If you put it in the scale, you can only pendulum summon DD monsters, and then during the standby phase, you reduce this card's level by 2, and it can go to a minimum scale of 1, and then you destroy all monsters of that level or lower, except DDD Monsters. Copernicus is the card that is currently the most expensive in the main deck, in my opinion. For the pure, well, I say in my opinion, it technically is a fact, because the others have had multiple prints, in theory. This one has only had one print in the structure deck. It is a £15 common, which is why I feel that this is due an OTS reprint or a Ghost from the Past reprint. This card is, when it is normal or special, you get to Foolish Burial, send a DD card, specifically DD Monster, I believe, from your deck to the graveyard, which sets you up your fusion plays of Necro Slime and Vice Typhoon, and it can also set you up some synchro plays of Lamia. We do currently have, I believe it's like a 1.5 card combo where you get the Dark Contract, activate Dark Contract, search out Copernicus, summon Copernicus, send Lamia, Lamia gets rid of the contract, summons itself out, make Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh then set Scales. Now, obviously, you will need other cards to kind of continue to make your plays from that, and that's kind of where it comes into, but right now that is kind of the lowest resource combo that we have. There are a lot of combo videos online. There are a lot of combo videos on this particular channel, and Jacked Yugioh is one of the best for those. So by all means, go check out their channel. And kind of, he really does help you. And he has done both a European version and an American version as well. So keep that in mind. We'll then move on to Orpheros. Orpheros is a level 4 tuner, which is very, very important. It does have the effect that if you take burn damage, which you will get off the back of Gilgamesh and your Ragnarok, you can special summon this card from the hand. Keep in mind, if this card is special summoned by any effect, Monster Reborn it, special summon it by banishing Swell Slime, special summon it by Pendulum Summoning, special summon it via its own effect, it will lock you into Fiends. Why is that important, I hear you scream? Well, because if you want to compete at the highest level, Baron de Fleur is probably the best card you can get, because it allows you to set this up before your 5th summon and protects everything from the Biru going forward. The thing you're going to be using Orpheros for, or the way you do the Baron combo, is you actually search it. You do need to open up Swell Slime, a route to Griffin, and a route to another DD in order to make that play, but you do it and it is very, very successful, because then once you make that, your rest of the board is protected. Its scale effect does come up quite a lot as well, is you get to target one spell or trap on the field and one other DD or Dark Contract card you control, and destroy both. So it can be very offensive to deal with your opponent's back row, especially if your decks are running around Tikaboo. But it can also be used in the combo where it pops itself and your Marksman to put them to the graveyard. Marksman will get a Foolish Burial, and then you have the ability to add this back to the hand should you want to. So there's a lot of different routes of plays that you'll see throughout the combo. But the biggest thing is, it is a level 4 tuner, so you do want to try and set up with either Griffin or Copernicus after you have successfully made your XYZs, or after you have successfully made Gilgamesh, because then it unlocks you your Siegfried plays, which is relevant with the field spell that we'll get on later on. Then, of course, you've got your Ragnarok and your Thomas. Now, I'm going to talk about these in tandem for the pure fact that they are only at 1 because you mainly want them in the scales. Now, Ragnarok goes in the scale when you special summon a DD monster. It can revive a triple D monster from the graveyard, but you burn for 1,000. That's where it gets quite important, because that's where Orpheros can then trigger to summon itself down for free. Thomas, when you put it in the scales, it's during the main phase you get to target a face-up DD Pendulum monster in your extra deck and add it to your hand. So it lets you regain some resource management, which is also very, very important. But because we're not playing Kali Yuga in this build, you don't really want these both on the board at the same time. And the chances are when you get them into the scales, or when you get them on the board, it's only then going to be used as link fodder into your Gilgamesh. The only other times that you'd want to summon either one of these to the board is if you've got Ragnarok still in the deck. You can use Savant Thomas to pop one of your scales to summon the Ragnarok from the deck. Off the back of that as well, Ragnarok does have an effect that when it is normal or special, you revive a DD from the graveyard. And then again, it also has the ability to tribute another DD card you control to banish a monster your opponent controls. So it does give you a couple of utility plays, and it does give you a couple of options, which is really, really important. Then the Swells and the Necro Slime, again, I'll talk about these in tandem. Swell Slime lets you fuse from your hand using DD monsters that you have. It also has a very nice grave effect that you can banish it from the graveyard to special summon a DD from the deck. That's clearly triggered the dog, so, you know, double effects on a card is something he doesn't approve of. Wait till he sees DPE. Whew. And then, of course, you've got Necro Slime. Now, the reason Necro Slime is at 1, you can play it at 2 if you want, but I like going for the Necro Slime and the 1 Typhoon, for the pure fact that Typhoon can allow me to get an additional body on the board. It does what Necro Slime does by banishing itself plus another DD from the graveyard to special summon a Fusion DD from the extra deck. The difference with Typhoon is it will only let you special summon a level 7 DD monster from... sorry, not DDD monster from the deck, a level 8 or higher DDD fusion monster from your extra deck. So it means you can't make small Genghis, but you can make big Genghis, which is obviously important during your turn. But if you do it during your opponent's turn, if you do it during your turn and you're going first, you can then use that triple D Genghis to revive another Genghis or another card from the graveyard, and then rank on top that High Flame King and go into the Deuce X. So these pretty much share the same thing, and like I said, you only want the one Necro Slime. You're either going to be playing 1-on-1 or you're going to be playing 2 of this and none of this. Entirely up to you. I like the fact that, obviously this is only a once per turn, so the way that I'm playing this deck is you put everything you can. Now you can hold some of these back, which can come up when they try to Nibiru you, because you'll put them into a position where you make your rank 6 Wave King, and then they're like, right, okay, well, your next step is make the Wave King, I need to Nibiru you now. And when you get to that point, you still sometimes have Vice Typhoon and Necro Slime in the graveyard, ready to pounce and rebuild your board should they Nibiru you. Then, of course, again, Lamia is now back down to 1. The reason this card is at 1 is because you're not going to be relying it on heavily. Keeping in mind that you do need to get a level 7 to the board in order to then successfully kind of get into a Siegfried. Your more modernised route of getting into Siegfried is Orpheros plus one of the level 4s. But Lamia does come up and play, like I said, with the combo of Copernicus to send a contract to summon it back to then be used as link material for your Gilgamesh. So that's kind of the utility of Lamia. There was a couple of times where I actually sided Lamia out and then opened up the Copernicus combo, and I was like, well, that's annoying. But it's just something to keep in mind as well. Considering that we're not actually playing any level 7s in our extra deck, your Lamia to Siegfried play very, very rarely will ever come up. Like, you'd need to get a Necro Slime on the board plus a Lamia plus a Genghis in order to do it, and that's just very, very limited. So that's pretty much where most of the talking is going to come from. I know I'm 10 minutes in, but like I said, I kind of didn't want to just go. I want to give you the list as we go, and I'll break down the video as well so you can just skip to get the list. But the list is very, very basic. It's very, very like cookie cutter from every list that you'll see, and kind of go from there. So the hand traps is just very, very simple. 2 2s 2s. I spoke to Joe about playing Crossout Designator just for a bit more consistency, because certain hand traps on some of your cards can end your turn, but the idea is that you're supposed to be using stuff like Kepler, and then you've opened up a Griffin, so they like you bait out something there, and then your Gilgamesh then sets up your scales. But 2 2s, now this is important with stuff like, and I'll show it now, Small World, and I'll also show you the bigger connector for Small World as well. So this is the consistency cards, and your Archfiend Eccentric is your bridge to get to your consistency cards. Now, the reason this is important is, off of Small World, you can reveal any of your DDDs from the hand, go into an Eccentric from the deck, because it will only share Fiend, and then you get to add pretty much any of your DDDs, because again, it will only share Fiend. Off the back of that as well, you can use Eccentric to reveal Ash Blossom in the deck, and that will then lead you to any DDD that has 0 attack. You can also go Effect Veiler into Eccentric, Light onto a Light, but nothing else matches, and then go into any of your DDDs. So the way you've got to see this is, this in theory counts as 3 additional copies of the DDDs that you need. And at the moment, the other cheaper option is the Peri Rizzi map. I personally don't like it because it will only search you Copernicus or Kepler, and then it costs you half your life points, and it means you have to normal summon that card in order to use its effects. So it restricts you quite a lot, but I understand if you are on a bit of a budget, then Peri Rizzi map is obviously going to be a lot better for you than trying to fork out. I think these are like 20 quid a copy now. If you can get a playset for 50 quid, it's definitely worth getting. The bridges are very, very simple in this particular deck. The only thing you can't do is a link of Ghost Ogre to Eccentric, or Eccentric to Ghost Ogre, because they're both level 3s and they're both lights. I'm considering cutting this, but this is actually really, really good going second as well. Like if your opponent has a Barrier Statue, if your opponent's got DPE and they're trying to trigger off Scythe, anything like that, this can really, really help you out. So that's just the hand trap line art, and then the consistency cards. For the DDD, or the D Dark Contract Spells and Traps, we've got triple of the Gate, which is your Searcher, a single Swamp, which is your Fuser, a 1 Dark Contract with the License, and the 1 triple D Headhunt, which technically isn't a Dark Contract, but it might as well be. So obviously your Dark Contract with the Gate and the Swamp King will burn you for 1,000 life points during each of your main phases after the turn they've been activated. So if I activate it, it's not going to burn me for 1,000 that turn. Your Dark Contract lets you search any DD monster, which is great because if your opponent doesn't get rid of this, you're going to always be able to get a free search every single turn. And if you combo off with Dark, which I have done a couple of times over this weekend, you actually gain the life points rather than burning them, which is obviously really, really funny in a Prank Kids matchup. So yeah, very straightforward on this one. This is the first one you want to go for. Your Swamp King lets you fusion summon a DD monster from your extra deck by banishing the materials from the graveyard using the field or the hand. The reason we've only got one of this as well is because we're only running, in theory, 4 fusion monsters, and the only other way that you're going to make Lamia into Siegfried is use the Arc. So you're going to go down very specific routes in order to kind of achieve different outcomes, depending on what you need. These are the 2 brand new cards. So Dark Contract with License is actually crazy good. So if your opponent special summons a monster with the same type, Fusion, Synchro, XYZ, or Link as a triple D monster you control, they get burnt for 1,000 life points, and they are locked out of that summoning mechanic while this card remains face up on the field for the rest of that turn. So basically, in a Prank Kids matchup, for example, as soon as they link into Meow Meow, they will burn for 1,000, and then they can no longer go into the stuff like Bow Wow Bark. They can't go into Doodle Doo until they get rid of this card. Off the back of that as well, if you're playing a fusion monster, and for example, they're playing... Let's think of the future. They're playing Despias. Again, you lock them out under this. They really will struggle. It's a really cool card. If it is sent to the graveyard as well, you get to add back a DD from your Pendulum Zone or your graveyard to the hand. So it lets you recur the resources. There are a couple of builds that are actually siding this in, which is completely fine because my build is at 42. There are games where if I get to go first, I play this, I lock my opponent out. But I understand that there are games as well where it's like if you go second, you're probably going to use this as a send effect to then add back the resource. It really is up to you. Triple D Headhunt is like a crackdown, but for DDDs. So if you control a triple D monster, you target a face-up monster your opponent controls, take control of it until the end phase of this turn, but negate its effects are negated, and it cannot declare an attack. If it was a monster special summon from the extra deck, it becomes a DDD monster. That's important because that will be used then to link off into Gilgamesh, or it can also be used to be just ranked on top of into a Deus Ex, which of course is your new boss monster, which is incredibly good, but also incredibly frustrating as well, and I'll explain that when we get to it. So that's it for the DDD Dark Contracts and everything else. We're going to look at the only draw card that we put in the deck is a Law of Darkness. It's a gamble every single time. There'll be times when you'll draw into what you need, there'll be times when you don't. It's just this deck needed a bit of consistency. I'm currently at 42, so arguably this can come out and go from there. And the last cards are Double Droplet and 1 Call By. So Call By is there to protect you from as many hand traps as you possibly can, which is why I'm considering going into Cross Out Designator. You could even put a 2 Cross Out Designator and go for the 1 card that I'm missing, which is a 1-for-1. And I'll explain the 1-for-1 in a minute, because I've got mixed feelings about it. The droplets are purely here because there are times when you need to break board. If my opponent Dark Rulers me, if my opponent droplets me, at least this will still put in work. And the pure fact, and I'm still bemused about this, but the pure fact that I could go activate Triple D Headhunt, chain droplets, send in the DD Headhunt to negate another card as well is beyond me. Like, I think it's absolutely sickening, but it's an interaction that happens, which is why droplets is so goddamn good and so goddamn expensive. If you don't have droplets, chalices are the next best alternative you can get away with, or you build this deck to purely go second, Dark Ruler, blow your opponent's board out, and then build your stun board and go from there. So, before I move on to the extra deck, obviously the question about 1-for-1, why is it not in my deck? Ultimately, number one, I forgot it, and when I went to the locals, I wasn't able to find one. But secondly, the reason that I've done it is the majority of my combos and the way that I play, I actually burn through a lot of my hand. Now, the only card that I'm really gonna want to 1-for-1 out is probably more likely going to be the Kepler. Now, of course, there is that argument on top of that as well, that it's like, well, if you 1-for-1 and send a Vice Typhoon or a Necro Slime or one of the hand traps, you're then turning that into an additional DDD, which can come up, and I completely agree. So 1-for-1 is definitely a card that I need to find and remember to put in here, and like I said, if I was doing that, I'm probably going to look at playing around with crossouts and a 1-for-1, or just go for triple crossouts. So that's my kind of feedback on this particular list. Moving on to the extra deck, the only DD, the non-DD monsters that we play are, of course, basically 2 of the strongest cards in the game right now. 1 Baron de Fleur and 1 AAA Zeus. Oh, double A Zeus. Triple A's, triple D's, double A's, and anyway. Zeus is very, very important because you can absorb materials off or onto your Deus Ex but you can also build up to a 4 material if you go into Wave King and then into King Tail. So then Zeus becomes a 2 send card, which is really, really important. Baron is there because, like I said, if you open up the correct combo, which surprisingly enough is relatively consistent to do, you can then ultimately protect your plays going forward, which does put in a huge amount of work. Especially when your opponent doesn't expect it, or especially when your opponent is sitting holding an Nibiru going, you know what, I'm absolutely going to wreck your board apart, wait for your 5th summon, and you go, okay, cool, Baron. So, very, very important. Then let's go over the most used, or the highest featured card, and that is, of course, we now play triple Genghis. Sorry, Gilgamesh. I always get these two mixed up every single time. So the reason we're now playing 3 of this is the fact that it is incredibly easy to summon out, thanks to, of course, our Griffin. So it's very easy. As soon as you get another DD on the board and then you just special summon one down, you get to go into your Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh will then set your pendulum scales and then you're good to go. Obviously, it is a tad bit better in America, but you've kind of got to roll with what you've got access to. It's very important, and of course you can just rank on top of this into the Deuce X, and then it also has the effect that if it is destroyed by a battle or card effect while it is in your possession, you get to special summon a DD monster from your extra deck or grave in defense. Now when it says special from the extra deck, it of course is referring to face-up pendulum monsters, guys. Don't try and go, oh well, that means I can look in my extra deck and just summon out a Siegfried. No, that's not how it works. I'm pretty sure it's just going to relate to, it allows you to bring out your pendulums. The only other single we play is, of course, the one Siegfried. Very straightforward and simple on this one. So this is for your spell and trap negate. And this can actually come up quite interestingly in droplets. So what I mean by that is against droplets and Dark Ruler, the chances are your opponent's probably going to drop them early. And the droplets, they might wait for you to try and exort a negate before they droplet you. But what's really, really good is with droplets, if you've got a spell or trap along the back row that can be activated, as long as you can then choose to activate that, you can then chain Siegfried after that chain to then negate the droplets. Now, obviously, that is going to be a very, very specific scenario, but keep in mind that it is a scenario you need to be aware of that should it come up, you can do, because droplet says you can't respond directly to droplets with the card that it sends. The thing with Siegfried is, because it's not a when your opponent activates an effect, it's a quick effect you just target and turn off. Should your opponent go droplet, and for example, they have a monster on the board that they did not send, you could chain Triple D Headhunt as chain link 2, and then chain link 3, you could use Siegfried to target and negate the droplets. Very, very important. It's the exact same way how it worked with the Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, so it is something to be aware of. Then with the fusion monsters, of course, we've got the 2 Genghis and the 1 Mac Daddy Big Genghis. Obviously, these 2 are just there to pretty much revive from the graveyard and make your rank 6 play in the form of your High Wave King Caesar. The High Flame King Genghis is great during your turn, and this is one of the biggest causes because it's very well hidden, and I don't know why. I don't understand why it has to say during your turn. Like, it should just be in the quick effect, the same as Siegfried. It's like, cool. But during your turn, you have a quick effect to negate a spell or trap, which is really, really important. And if a DD is special summoned, you get to revive a DD from the graveyard. So it does put in a bit of work as well, which is why I still kind of play it. And it's something that I probably rely on a little bit too much, so it's something I could look at changing up, but it still puts in the work that it needs to. The 1D art, this puts in so much work, it's unreal. Like, still don't... This card deserves a foil upgrade as well. So what makes the arc so good is with this particular deck, you do have a combo that lets you win during time. So if your opponent is, like, obviously do not slow play your opponent, because trust me, that pisses me off. I'm not going to do it to my opponent, right? But if you have 5 minutes left on the clock and it goes into time, or if your opponent builds their board, passes to you, and is like, right, okay, go, 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 and you're like, right, okay, well, I'm going to go. As long as you can get to this, there is a point in the combo where you burn yourself for 1,000, you can then burn your opponent for 1,000, and then you get this card out, and then by doing that, you trigger your Ragnarok to burn you for 1,000, but any burn damage you would take would actually allow you to gain that damage. So you go back up to 8,000 while your opponent is down on 7,000. Then, of course, any additional burn effect you would then take is gained instead, and that's where you set up the field spell as well, so it then burns your opponent for another 1,000. It's always nice when a deck has natural ways of winning in time, because sadly, in the current game state that we are in, time happens a lot more consistently. Whether it be deliberate or not, you still need to have natural ways of winning, whether that be the forms of Cowboy, whether that be the annoying forms of Long U, there are still ways of doing it. Moving on to the XYZs. For the rank 4, we've got the Wave King Caesar. For his buffed up on the roids upgrade is the High Wave King. And then, of course, we've got the 1 King Tell. Now, I know a lot of you will be like, whoa, well, the new people back will be like, hang on a minute, I haven't played these since they first come out. Why am I now playing them now? Well, it's very, very simple. You rank 4 into Wave King. You've already burnt 1,000 because of Gilgamesh, so you then get to rank on top into King Tell. King Tell then lets you detach a material to balance out that burn you've just taken, and then you use Orpharos to then pop the King Tell, put it to the graveyard, or link off King Tell, entirely up to you. This will then get you a Foolish Burial, whether that be of Swell Slime, Vice Typhoon, Necro Slime, Vice Typhoon, or the Field Spell to then give you back an Orpharos. It's entirely up to you. Off the back of that as well is through your combo, you will actually revive the Wave King, link the Wave King off into another Gilgamesh, which is why we play 3 of him. That will then let you trigger his effect to add you a Dark Contract, whether that be the Field Spell or whether that be the Fusion Spell, entirely up to you. Obviously, Wave King will go on top of your 2 Gengises, and what makes it so good is when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated that would special summon a monster, not once per turn, you can detach a material to negate that activation. So, you want to activate Rite of Amasteria? No. You want to be able to activate a 10 in hand? No. Very, very good, very, very important, puts in a lot of work, and it does have a very nice effect that it can boost 2 of your DDD monsters by 1800, meaning that your weaker ones are even harder to deal with. And then finally, the Mac Daddy Boss Monster. This is your brand new card. I'm not going to go over its Pendulum effect because it's pretty irrelevant unless you go down that particular route. But its monster effect reads as thus. It can be ranked on top of any triple D monster you control. It has the effect, the quick effect, once per chain. Once per chain. What does that mean? Well, if you go through full combo, you'll actually have 2 contracts plus him with 1 material. Why is that important? Well, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can detach 2 materials or destroy a Dark Contract card you control to steal your opponent's monster and attach it to this as material. Well, what does that mean? Well, he's already got 1 material. It means if I pop a contract, I steal one of my opponent's monsters, I now have 2 materials, which means I can use his effect again. If I then use it again because I've got 2 contracts, I can then use it for a 3rd time by popping said contract and stealing my opponent's monster. Well, how does that make sense? Well, the way you keep going is you'll ultimately end up being able to resolve this 4 times if you ended up getting the 3rd field spell in play as well, which is why it's so important to search out your field spells and all of your contracts for this deck. What makes this disappointing in the fact is, well, if you don't have a Dark Contract and you don't have 2 materials, you're not going to be able to use this effect. The other thing as well is that it is a when effect in 2020. It is important that it is a when effect because sometimes it means if they go DPE, you go, sure, effect to absorb it. Even if DPE destroys this, you still absorb the DPE, and DPE will go to the graveyard as material, not as being destroyed, so it won't be able to trigger its effect to then use it, unless, of course, they decide to, well, they can't on the chain backwards, can't destroy the DPE, so very important that one. The issue with it being a when effect is it means it has to happen then and there in the same chain. So if they were to go, for example, Thunderease, normal summon, effect chain link 1 on the normal summon, effect chain link 2 of the banished monster to add it back to the hand, you can't use this. Annoyingly as well, it's only a card that your opponent controls, so you can't try and absorb from the grave, from the hand, from the banish zone, from wherever. I would have loved it if it was able to do that from wherever because it doesn't negate, but it still would have been cool to kind of go, yeah, sure, absorb the Nibiru, this goes to the graveyard, get a token, you don't get a Nibiru, like that would have been pretty cool. Anyway, that is it for the entire extra deck and the entire deck. Like I said, I would say it's cookie cutter, but I feel that the deck relatively is. It really comes down to your hand trap lineup. I don't think there's any DD variations that you can make unless you are in the American kind of play state, and that's where you're allowed to have Zero King Rage as well. A brief look at the extra deck. It really depends. Like my extra deck's a little bit over the place because of different locals that I've been at. So I'm just going to show you ones of the cards. So obviously you've got your hand traps, additionals of Lanciers, token collectors. And the best thing about this is token collector's a fiend, so you can actually use it as a bridge to get to your other cards. Lancier is a light, so again you can use it as a bridge. Nibiru is a light as well, you can use that as a bridge. Lightning Storm, you know, you need to blow out back rows and front rows. Cosmics, Evenlies, Draw and Lock Birds, and that's pretty much it for the hand trap lineup. For this particular one, obviously these change depending on the local environment you're at, but that's kind of what you need to look at. Anyway, I hope you found this video more helpful than me just going, oh, here's the same list that you've seen 101 times. I'm actually going to go, here's the list you've seen 101 times, but I'm going to explain in as much detail as possible why you're using those particular cards and be as informative as I possibly can as well, so that both new returning and experienced DDD players might learn something new or might be able to watch this video and go, great, thank you so much. I now know why and how to play a deck like this. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, guys, as absolutely always, stay safe. And of course, happy dueling.